Today looks like 5 separate fights: a bill to tax the AI giants and hand every American a check, an accusation about one banned machine that may or may not even exist, 3 engineers hauled into HR for testifying at City Hall, and then underneath all of that, something subtler: brain implants doubling, a full body scanner that runs on spare AI compute. So here's the thread. The top of this industry is spending enormous energy on one question: who controls the AI build-out and who pays for it? And down below, the capability itself keeps getting cheaper, wider, and harder for anyone to hold still. Stay with me. By the close, you'll see why the fight up top and the widening down below are really one story. Let's get into it. Let me start with the biggest number of the day: $7 trillion. Senator Bernie Sanders introduced a bill that would tax the largest AI companies and route the money to every American. Here's the mechanism: a one-time 50% tax on the stock of any company doing more than $200 million a year in AI sales. That tax seeds a national investment fund. Sanders estimates it at roughly $7 trillion or so. The fund pays a 5% dividend, which works out to roughly $1,000 a year for each American, and the rest flows toward healthcare, education, and housing. And a bipartisan commission confirmed by the Senate would hold voting shares so that it could block corporate decisions that it judged harmful to the public. A sovereign wealth fund is the model. Norway has one, Alaska has one. These are not new. A state-owned pool of assets that pays returns out to its citizens. The twist here, though, is what seeds it. Instead of oil revenue, for example, it's equity taken from the AI firms themselves, from intelligence and compute. But let's set the politics aside, because of course politics are rife in this particular conversation. But the bill itself is the AI era question in general made manifest. Who owns the upside of this build-out? Sanders' framing is the public has got to have a significant seat at the table. And this show has tracked a whole season of softer versions of that same instinct. OpenAI's foundation putting $250 million, for example, towards studying post-AI economics. The reported White House talks about taking equity stakes in OpenAI, and an earlier proposal to move half of top lab equity into a federal fund. This bill is the largest and most substantial vehicle yet, and it should get the same scrutiny as the gentler gestures have. When Sanders met about this with both Sam Altman and Dario Almeida, the reporting says that they both stayed far apart on how much of their companies Americans should own. Every one of these actors has a stake in their own framing. The lab CEO proposing a study and the senator proposing a 50% tax are both staking a claim to how this all gets divided. 2 things stand out to me, though. 1, the bill taxes AI companies, but where does that line even sit, especially in the future? Everybody is going to be an AI company here pretty soon, at least partly invested in AI. NVIDIA right now builds the chips, for example. App makers rent the models. At $200 million in AI sales being the bar there, who counts? It's really unsettled. And number 2 here, Americans should control the AI industry. That fences a capability that crosses borders by nature. Redistributing the upside, but only to one country's citizens, is still a kind of narrowing. And here's the contradiction underneath the whole fight. Several of these same figures, Musk among them probably most prominently, keep saying that AI and robotic output will soon make money itself far less relevant. So you have people arguing fiercely over how to slice a pie, while also insisting that the pie is about to become close to infinite. And that is the strange shape of this right now. The concentration of AI wealth is real and years in the making, and nobody obvious is positioned to steward it. Not the founders, not the government, not a wary public whose distrust is partly a product of the story that the incumbents have told it. The full thread and all the sources are in today's Century Report, but the takeaway on this for now: this is the first time that anyone has put a hard number, $7 trillion, on the question of who owns what this technology builds. And that really is the honest question for this moment. Who owns what this builds? But I recommend holding that concept a little loosely, because every plan in this fight, even the $7 trillion one, assumes the same thing: that the pie is still the pie and will remain the pie. That ownership and dividends and a fair slice are the framing that matters here. And perhaps for how things have been up until now, they are. People do need a floor while the ground moves under them. The dividend, the housing, the care, those are real needs in a real and difficult stretch of transition years. But the build-out that these plans want to tax is the same build-out aimed by the account of several of its own builders, and many others, honestly, at a world where the pie stops being the thing you measure. That's the part that none of these proposals can quite hold. They're arguing over how to divide an upside, while the technology underneath them is pointed at a place where upside isn't counted in the same way at all. And honestly, I'd argue the upside at stake here is far greater than even our maximum concept of what financial capitalist wealth even means. 7 trillion is the biggest number that anyone has dared attach to this question. And my honest guess is that just a few years from now, it won't look too bold. It'll look small. Because we were still measuring the whole thing in dollars in a world in which the increasingly prevailing technology of most consequence is diffuse-prone by nature, making gating and extraction, whether with money or with any other form of scarcity-dependent currency, an increasingly losing bet. The fight over the floor seems right based on our experience of the extractive capitalist world up until now, but keep one eye on the horizon beyond it, because what's being built is bigger than the ledger we're arguing over. Now to a different lever of control, not the money, but the machines. The U.S. Commerce Department, and yes, that is the same department that forced Anthropic to pull Fable due to export control concerns, told executives at ASML, the Dutch company, that it's concerned one of the firm's most advanced machines may have ended up in China. The machine is an EUV lithography system. EUV machines are the only tools on Earth that can print the most advanced chip patterns, the leading edge logic that frontier AI training runs on. You cannot make it without one. ASML is the only company that actually builds them. Outside NVIDIA and the big cloud providers, it may be the single most important company in the entire AI build-out. Its market value sits at near $700 billion on a monopoly that no rival has matched in nearly 2 decades. Selling those machines to China has been banned since 2019, so an EUV unit reaching China would be a serious breach. U.S. officials say that they have evidence that ASML shipped EUV-related components and transport gear to China, but, and this is the center of it here, they've declined repeatedly to show any evidence of that, not to reporters and apparently not even to ASML itself. So, ASML's answer is flat. No such machine exists in China, and it never has. The company says it tracks every single unit it has ever shipped, and its China-based staff sit, by design, on the far side of an internal firewall that walls them off from EUV know-how. So here's the commercial logic, which cuts really hard against the accusation. ASML expects about 20% of its 2026 revenue from older generation machines that's already permitted to sell in China. That's revenue that it would forfeit, along with its standing as Europe's most valuable company, by risking the entire EUV ban over one illegal sale. It's a strange bet for a company to be accused of making. Now hold the department's claim and the company's claim side by side. Both are claims from parties with stakes. And look at one detail that tilts the ground. The same federal agency pressing this case has committed up to $150 million of taxpayer money to a startup called Xlight, a company building the light source technology that could one day challenge the very core of ASML's monopoly. A government scrutinizing a monopoly while its own department has money riding on the would-be successor. That is a dynamic to examine closely. But let's step back to the bigger frame. This whole regime rests on a belief that the most advanced chips can be fenced inside one company's one machine. The trouble is, that fence is already being routed around. Huawei has named a domestic path to advanced chips without Western lithography at all, targeting the leading edge by 2031 with no EUV required. What it comes down to is this: an export rule is only as strong as the actual choke point it guards, and this one is being enforced on evidence nobody will show to protect a bottleneck that the rest of the world is already engineering its way past. That's the time we live in. From the machines now to the people who build the buildings that house them. 3 Amazon software engineers say the company opened an internal investigation against them for speaking at City Hall. Their names are Darius Irini, Liesel Wigand, and Patrick Schlerscher. They are members of a worker collective called Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, and on their own time, they testified to Seattle's City Council in favor of data center transparency rules, mandatory water and power reporting, and an end to the NDAs and shell companies that keep these projects opaque to the communities hosting them. The June 9th edition of the Century Report covered that Seattle fight. Amazon's response is now the news. The engineers say that Amazon called them into separate virtual meetings and opened an investigation. So they filed a joint complaint with the Seattle's Office for Civil Rights, alleging illegal retaliation for political speech. Now, of course, as with any story with two different parties with stakes, there are two accounts, and they diverge sharply. That divergence is actually the story. Amazon's version is, a spokesperson said it became unclear whether the staffers spoke in their capacity as Amazonians and not as private citizens. And the company says it doesn't tolerate retaliation and has no current plans to fire anyone. The engineer's version is, they call that absurd. They say that they identified plainly as members of a worker collective, not as company spokespeople, on a matter where Amazon doesn't even have a proposed data center in Seattle, and made no formal comment at all. Patrick Schlerscher described the surprise HR call as horrifying. And the power gap here is important. This is a company worth more than $1 trillion versus 3 of its own engineers who spoke at a public meeting. And obviously that's not a balanced contest, and pretending it is would miss what's really happening. But look at the legal ground they're standing on. It's really specific. Seattle is one of a small handful of places that bars private employers from discriminating against employees over their political beliefs. The engineer's attorney is framing this then as a test. Does that protection actually reach tech workers who want a real say in the build-out that their own labor produces? And the early signs do cut their way. They report plenty of messages of support from colleagues, no internal criticism beyond the HR meetings, and 2 other workers who testified later have gotten no notice at all. The old model of this build-out depended on the people closest to it staying quiet. What this complaint represents is accountability accreting from the inside, from the engineers doing the building, in the one venue designed to protect exactly that kind of speech. Okay, let's shift away from the contests, because underneath every one of them, the capability keeps widening, and the next 2 stories are where you will feel that. Let's start with brain implants. The number of people living with electrodes in their brains has more than doubled in about 2 years. That estimate comes from Mariska van Strijnsel, a brain-computer interface researcher at University Medical Center Utrecht. A 2024 roundup counted about 67 volunteers across 21 research groups through the end of 2023. The very first such device went in back in 1998. Van Strijnsel now estimates around 150 people carry a brain electrode. A brain-computer interface reads neural activity and turns it into commands, such as moving a mouse cursor or controlling a computer, and increasingly decoding speech a person intends but can no longer actually produce. The Century Report covered Casey Harrell on June 16th, the man with ALS who has logged more than 3,800 independent hours speaking through an implant at home at nearly 99% accuracy. And that was one case. What's come into focus now is the field forming around it. 2 markers tell you it crossed a line. First, China this year granted the first national approval for an implantable brain-computer interface to be used outside clinical trials. A regulatory first. Second, and this is the clearest one, a company called Paradromics just completed the first surgical implant in an FDA-approved feasibility study at University of Michigan Health. The first participant is a Michigan woman who has had trouble speaking because of motor neuron disease, the same family of illness as ALS. It's where the neurons that drive your muscles fail even while your mind still stays fully intact. She'll be followed for 6 years. Here's how her device works. It's called Connexus. A dense array of microelectrodes records neural activity, routes it to a small transceiver implanted in the chest, and transmits wirelessly through the skin to an external receiver, aiming to restore speech and let her control a computer. And she's one of many now. Neuralink reports implanting 21 people over 2 years. Synchron is running trials across North America and Australia. Precision Neuroscience is testing a device that rests on the brain's surface instead of penetrating it. And BrainGate, the academic effort that built Harrell's system, has pivoted from cursor control to decoding speech directly, reconstructing his voice from old recordings. But now the honest part, of course. These devices are still experimental. There are real questions about who benefits and how long the hardware even lasts. And there's also a genuine trade-off baked in here. The deeper, cleaner the neural signal that you want, the more invasive the surgery to get it. And that is a real cost, not just a detail. And here's the big one. For someone losing speech to ALS, though, that loss used to be permanent, a one-way door. The time between losing speech and restoring it is now collapsing toward the length of a single research cycle, and the decoding software gets better with every participant that it learns alongside. And the second one here is even stranger because of who's building it. Midjourney, the company known for generating images from text prompts, just unveiled its first piece of hardware. It is a full-body ultrasound scanner. A ring of thousands of tiny transducers captures vertical slices through the body, muscle, fat, bone, organs. You step onto a platform that lowers you into a shallow pool. Sensors send ultrasonic waves through you from every angle, and the reflected ripples get reconstructed into a detailed 3D image. And the whole scan takes about 60 seconds. The CEO, David Holtz, says the system aims for image quality comparable to MRI in many ways and could be used as often as daily. He's described an eventual version that, in his words, in many ways is even superior to MRI machines, without radiation, without giant magnets. Those are the company's claims, of course, so let's name this plainly. The gap between a CEO's pitch and a clear diagnostic device is very wide. About a dozen people have been scanned so far. The company holds no FDA clearance, and it's planning to start instead with body composition maps, which actually face a lower regulatory bar than diagnostic imaging. Holtz wants to place 10 units in a San Francisco spa opening before the end of 2027, next to the saunas, cold plunges, and a gym. It's built with an ultrasound firm called Butterfly Network, 40 of their ultrasound-on-chip modules paired with 2 petaflops of processing. And that is the revealing detail. Forget the loose connection to image generation. The company has not clearly articulated their goals with this beyond being a second use for AI compute that would otherwise sit idle. The real story is the lateral move. A company that built a giant compute base to render pictures is pointing that same hardware at the inside of a human body. It's treating medical imaging as an adjacent market that it can walk into sideways, rather than a domain locked behind dedicated multi-million-dollar machines and the hospitals that own them. But there's honest friction here. Scanning healthy people's whole bodies has a documented downside. It surfaces false positives and incidental findings, ambiguous spots that lead to more tests and more anxiety, sometimes procedures you never actually needed. The medical literature has flagged this for years, and it is real, and a 60-second spa scanner doesn't make that go away. But here's the through line. Regardless of whether this specific company clears the path, MRI-grade imaging has always been scarce, expensive, and rationed through hospital schedules. A rig that runs on commodity AI compute aimed for 60-second scans that you can get as casually as a sauna, that describes a future where looking inside your own body shifts from a rare, costly event towards something abundant and routine. All right, let's bring it together. Look at where the energy went today. A bill to tax the AI giants and divide the proceeds. An accusation meant to fence one banned machine inside one country's border. An investigation meant to keep 3 engineers quiet. Most of the day's effort at the top of this industry went into one instinct: control. Who owns it? Who can have it? Who gets to speak about it? And every one of those control moves is straining. The bill argues over slicing a pie that the same people say is about to become close to infinite. The export fence guards a choke point that Huawei is already routing around. The investigation runs into a civil rights statute written for exactly this. Now hold that against the evidence at the bottom of the day. A woman in Michigan with a device in her chest that the work suggests will give her back her voice, joining the population of people with brain implants that doubled in 2 years. A scanner that wants to make looking inside your own body as ordinary as going to the sauna. Nobody had to fight over who controls those. They're just getting cheaper and wider and harder to hold still. That is the shape of it. The slice of the pie was never really the prize worth winning. While the contests over who owns the build-out play out up top, the capability underneath keeps doing the thing that none of the fences can stop: reaching more people for less every cycle. A voice restored, a body made legible, a generative future on the horizon. That is where this is actually heading. We'll see you tomorrow.